Okay, here's a quick overview of the C10 topic life cycle assessments. This is lesson 6. So there are 4 main steps in a life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessments are a series of steps, a process that is undertaken by companies making particular products. So it could be anything from making a plastic bag or a paper bag to making a pen or a pencil. Lots of objects will have gone through this process. And what a manufacturer will need to do, or a company will need to do when deciding to make a product such as a pen, what they're going to do is decide on the raw materials that they're going to use. So they're going to have to look at how these materials are extracted, such as drilling for oil, to then process, to then produce plastic. And then they need to look at, well, how does that raw material get turned into something like this plastic to then go on to the manufacturer? So this will be the company that makes the actual product. Will they need to process it further and change the plastics, change their chemical properties or their physical properties? It might be that they want to make the plastic a bit more flexible so it bends a little bit more. They might want to change the colour, the texture, how durable it is. All these sort of things depend on what the product is for. They then need to look at the packaging that it comes in. So for example, the pen that I'm using now came in a packet here with lots of other pens. So they'll look at the type of container that you're going to put them in. And then we're going to look at the distribution of them. How do you get those items from the manufacturer to the shops? Do they just simply go in a cardboard box? Or do they need lots and lots of packaging and protection as well, because they're quite a delicate item? It varies. All right. And actually, you might look here as, do we need lots of different parts all to arrive in the manufacturing process at the same time? So something like a car, for example, you'd have the wheels and the tyres and the brakes and all these different things. They'll all be made in certain places. The chassis will be made in a different place, and we'll have lots of parts all brought together, ready for construction. Okay. Once you've got that, then it goes to the customer. This is the use and operation. So I've been using this pen to write these lesson notes. So how long is it going to last for? Well, actually, this is not a single-use pen. It'll last me maybe a month or two. But then once I've used it, it's probably going to be disposed of. What about an item that uses energy, such as something like a dishwasher or a washing machine or a toaster? You might look at something like a mobile phone or a laptop. It could be complex, like a car, for example. How are the items used? How energy efficient are they? And that also links in with how long and how frequently they're used as well. Once the item has been finished with, we then need to think about the final step, which is disposal. What happens to it after it has been used by the consumer? Can it be reused into something else? Can you take the same item and turn it into something different? So, for example, you might have a jam jar that you've eaten all of the jam out of, you've washed it all up, and then all of a sudden you use that jar to store something else. So you might leave it in the garage and put some screws or nails in it or something like that, and it's a new storage container. You've reused the item for a different purpose. You could recycle it. You could take off the metal lid. That could be melted down and turned into something else. You could take the glass, melt it down, make another new glass product. You could incinerate your items, which is basically to burn them. So if it's too expensive or it's going to cost too much in terms of energy to reuse and recycle, you can burn them and then use that energy to produce steam by boiling water, and that could be used to generate electricity. And if all of that fails, then they can just go straight into landfill, and you let nature take its course and degrade the items naturally over time. Now, with all of these processes, we need to think about the transportation of each one of these. So how do these items get from the raw materials to the manufacturers, to the person, to the disposal? So that's an important key to look at how they're moved around. Are there any energy costs that go along with the process, particularly at the early stages when we're changing the raw ingredients into the items that you want? And particularly during the usage as well, depending on the item. And are there any waste products? So, for example, was this pen set here? Did it come in a box of about 100 packs that went to the supermarket, and then that came in a cardboard box? What happens to the cardboard box? What happens to the plastic sellotape that was used to hold it all together? So, what happens to all of the waste products that you get with each one of these stages? That all needs to be considered. And this is a life cycle assessment. This assesses each stage of this process, and it allows companies to decide whether they should manufacture a product in a particular way, or do they need to change part of the process. Now, you can do an evaluation of a life cycle assessment, and here it is. The thing is, some companies though can, once they've done their evaluation, they can be selective and they can abbreviate certain parts, and I'll come on to that in a second. To evaluate something, you simply just need to weigh up the positives and the negatives. So what are the advantages of using a particular product in a particular way, what are the disadvantages, and then making a judgment about, is that the right thing to do or not? And that depends on the item. You could be selective and only choose to look at certain parts of a process because you might want it to give you a certain outcome. If you only have certain questions, you'll only get certain answers. So you might choose to ignore certain parts of a life cycle assessment you think aren't going to be sort of favourable to the product that you want to make. And then what you could do is you could abbreviate parts of a life cycle assessment and simplify them so much that you lose any negative detail in there as well, which could affect your judgment. So you can bias a life cycle assessment, which can be quite it's something to watch out for. We can also put in things like value judgments. So you might say that something either looks nice or something doesn't look nice. It could be that, say plastic bags, for example. You might turn around and say, well, they're a bit of an eyesore on the environment, so that they're not a great thing to use. Well, again, things like that are value judgments. It means that that's down to someone's opinion. All right, so just be careful of those particular phrases. And then really the exam stuff is... the examiners really like to do a comparison between plastic bags and paper bags. And in the C10 book that I've got here, you'll see that I've got an example here on A8 and A9. So this is the kind of thing that they do. They'll give you some details about plastic bags and paper bags, and your job is to weigh up what's positive, what's negative for each one of these, and then make a judgment overall about which you think will be the more appropriate bag to use. For example, they can do it in this particular way. They might do it as part of a whole life cycle assessment, give you all the different stages and give you some details about that. Thing to watch out for though is to make sure when you're doing stuff like this that you're going to put in your own knowledge and information there as well. So for example, you might say here that the solid waste for a plastic bag is only 14 grams. So you might think, well, actually that's the one to go for then. All right, that's a lot less than the waste produced from a paper bag. But the extra knowledge that you know is that a paper bag is going to biodegrade much faster than a plastic bag will. So although you produce more, you may only find that maybe 5 years, 10 years this is degraded. You might be talking over 100 years for a plastic bag. So sometimes the numbers can be a bit misleading. You need to add your own slant on these and really say, what do these things mean? Right, that's your overview for life cycle assessments. I hope that gives you enough information to help you through the lesson.